Hello, everyone. I am Dr. David Emmanuel M. General, University Researcher 1 and Curator for Ants of the Entomological Collection of the UPLB Museum of Natural History, and I will be your MC today. Thank you for taking time to join us today for the MNH's Quincentennial Commemorations webinar series, Baliktanaw, Kasaysayan at Kalikasan, with the topic Herpetofaunal Studies in the Philippines, a recall. To start our session today, let us all welcome our director, Dr. Marian P. De Leon, who will be giving her welcome remarks.
Imbag nga bigat, kada kayo amin apo. A pleasant morning to each and everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to UPLB Museum of Natural History's Quincentennial Commemoration 10-part webinar series. The UPLB's MNH, ang Pilipinas sa loob ng 5 siglo, features online webinar series and virtual exhibits focusing on a theme, Baliktanaw, Kasaysayan at Kalikasan. The 10-part webinar series will give us the chronicles and highlights in Philippines' natural history for the past 500 years and gaps and opportunities for research on the diverse Philippine flora and fauna, as well as potential of the different microorganisms. Let this also be a venue for collaborative initiatives for researchers, taxonomists, naturalists, and hobbyists to come together to promote and contribute to the natural sciences and biodiversity conservation. Last June 2, our second webinar is a tandem presentation made by our own curator and former director, Dr. Juan Carlos T. Gonzalez, with Mr. Christian Perez, who gave a comprehensive presentation of the 500 years of ornithological explorations in the Philippines. It was attended by 278 participants, both in the Zoom and MNH YouTube channel. For those who missed the picturesque presentations of Dr. Gonzalez and Mr. Perez, you can still watch them by visiting the MNH YouTube channel. For today's webinar, our third of the 10 is a solo presentation by one of our supportive and very productive curator. We are very fortunate to have with us Dr. Leticia E. Afuang, who will bring a recall on the herpetofaunal studies in the Philippines. Just an anecdote, and with permission from our speaker, I received a personal message from her a week or perhaps 2 weeks ago informing me that she will be very busy preparing for her presentation, for she needs to consolidate more than 2,000 publications. Wow! Just like you, I'm very excited for this presentation of Dr. Afuang. Sabi nga, hooray, Dr. Afuang. So I will let our moderator, Professor Philip Alviola, to introduce further our speaker. And on behalf of the MNH Local Organizing Committee Chair, Franti Cruz, and Co-Chair, Mr. Alvin Fajardo, and MNH curators and staff, allow me to again welcome you all and greet you a pleasant morning. Back to you, Dr. Dave General.
Thank you po, Director De Leon. Now I will be giving the floor to the moderator for today's session, Professor Philip A. Alviola, Curator for Mammals and Other Wildlife at the UPLB Museum of Natural History.
Thank you, Dr. General. Okay, before I introduce our special guest speaker today, I would like to remind you of the house rules. First, make sure that your audio is on mute and your video is turned off. So please practice good webinar etiquette. And second, please use the Zoom webinar Q&A feature to send questions. For those who are watching on our YouTube stream, just put your questions in the comments area and our technical assistant will copy your questions to the Zoom Q&A. All right, I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce our speaker, Dr. Leticia E. Afuang. Dr. Leticia E. Afuang is the UPLB Museum Natural History Curator for Herpetofauna. She is a wildlife conservationist, herpetologist, and a full professor at the Animal Biology Division of the Institute of Biological Sciences. Ma'am Leti conducts research in wildlife biology, systematics, taxonomy, and ecology of herpetofauna. She engages in environmental science conservation and management research and extension in protected and biodiversity significant areas. Her research interests include amphibian and reptile biology, diversity, distribution, and conservation. Ma'am Leti, as we fondly call her, got her BS Zoology from UP Diliman in 1979, while she finished her MS Zoology and PhD Environmental Science degrees from UPLB in 1985 and 2003, respectively. She is a founding member of the Mindoro Biodiversity Conservation Foundation, Incorporated, has served as its founding president, and is currently the vice president. Dr. Afuang is also a founding member of the Biodiversity Conservation Society of the Philippines. She is the vice chair of the Reptiles and Amphibians Technical Working Group Subcommittee for the Philippine Red List of Threatened Committee for Wild Fauna. Friends, I will now give the floor to Dr. Leticia E. Afuang. Thank you very much.
I am so glad and enticed with the greeting of Director Marian in Ilocano. So I would answer her, kastamet kada kayo. Nasaya at nga bigat kada kayo amin. Sapay lakumata nasaya at ti aldaw nga pag arami din tayo. Okay. So now, thank you so much for that very, very warm introduction, Philip. Without much ado, let me go to my sharing of slides. So just as I said, this is a recall so that it will not be strict, but it will be a beautiful experience of storytelling of how herpetology developed in the country, guided by the theme Gahom sa Buot, which is Gahom, kaalaman or kamalayan, and Buot is pagkakasarinlan bilang isang bansa at bilang mga Pilipino, lalo na sa ating likas yaman at samot-saring buhay. The MNH theme is Baliktanaw sa Kasaysayan ng Kalikasan sa Pilipinas sa loob ng 5 siglo. The Philippine Quincentennial commemoration covers 500 years of growth of consciousness on the Philippine natural history, focusing on the development of herpetology in the country, starting off with the arrival of whom we call first explorer, which is Ferdinand Magellan, and he is landing at Cebu, and then later on he's lost at Mactan. I tried to put every herpetological study that I could find and then put them all together from 1521 to 2021. So this is an attempt to chronological account for the contributions of explorers, collectors, expeditions, natural history studies, and modern day surveys and discoveries. I have a picture here, and this is my team. I have a lot of, after having started to teach herpetology in the 1990s, I accumulated my data and my bibliographical archive for herpetology. So I have a complete mound of them. The problem is I have not systematically put them into a database set. I just have the references with me and I share it with my students every time I teach herpetology, which happens every second semester of every year. And so this time, because I needed to relate this story, I asked my students in conservation. They are all graduate students, and I'm proud to share their pictures here. Miss Janice Balangin, Miss Chris Flamiano, Mr. Joshua L. Nunez, Mr. Ralfino Sanchez, Mr. Marvin Sarmiento, and Mr. John Paul Tolentino. They actually helped me input the data into a long Excel data. Mahirap palang mag-manage ng ganon. Pati yung Excel natuturete pag maraming data. So you have to chop them and look into the details so that the language they speak and the typo will always be of the similar nature. Otherwise, analysis would be very difficult done. But yes, without their help, I would not have been able to organize the material altogether. My outline is simple. I tried to go into the herpetological studies of the Philippines by its past, by its progress, and its prospects. I have a prologue prior to Magellan's discovery. And then I focused the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period, the Philippine-American War, the short Japanese occupation, and then the progressive growth into the 20th century led by renowned and respectable scientists of the country, Dr. Rabor, Dr. Alcala, and his mentor, Walter Brown. And then the third part would be the present and recent developments in herpetological research, where I go into the expanded collaborative research, intensive exploration, and activated networking of herpetological studies in the Philippines, as well as the technology-aided data treasuries. And then my epilogue goes, what comes next? What do we see in the future for herpetology in the Philippines? So in my prologue, let's see. Prior to Magellan's discovery, the Philippines is already a country of its own. Despite its archipelagic nature, it is not yet set as one whole nation, but it is a mix of various islands who had their own culture and who had their own economic independence and cultural distinctions. They interacted with various other countries and other people, especially on the economic perspectives. They exchanged goods and materials, and mostly their interactions were in the marine coastal areas. Okay, so the Austronesians dispersed through the various vast distances of the oceans and seas using their unique ingenious sailboats. And there was already the Malayo-Polynesian language, including the Tagalog, which were derived from the Austronesian language. And it is also believed that these ancient mariners are engaged in trading. My source for this is a very comprehensive book by Judge Carpio, no, as he fought for us for the West Philippine Sea rights. So the Philippines were probably first occupied by people who arrived in small migrations from mainland Southeast Asia. And it was a mix of Negritos, Malay people, and Muslim traders. And you can see the root of interactions and also the ratio of people using specific languages, not simply dialects, but distinct languages that were independent and capable to stand on for their own uniqueness, and perhaps actually divided because they do not understand each other. Up to this point, a country has that characteristic that if you are not easy to learn language, you cannot understand your kababayan who is a Bisaya if you are Ilocano, or sometimes if you are Bisaya, your tongue would go twisted when you speak Tagalog and you would rather speak English and other languages such as Ibanag, Ibaloy, and others. No? But despite of that, the Philippines stands as one united country. So during the pre-colonial period, we had already this early world maps that included the presence of the Philippines in the illustration. No? It was already a recognized set of islands. And the islands are called Pulo in the Champa Sea. Okay. So in here, although the pictures are relatively small, I emphasize the maps of the Philippines recognized in the economic trade during that time prior to the coming of Magellan. And the influence of ecological setting to the pattern of settlement of early inhabitants was also obvious. Our people lived and thrived near the coastal areas. That was practical because food is easily available in the sea and water is also accessible. Although that is marine water, normally river systems are just near the nearby mountain areas. So that made life easier And even fresh water would come from the rivers that go and thrive toward the estuarine areas, meeting the sea in the coastal areas. So you would see here that the pictures of trade, as well as adopted stilt houses and even houseboats. Okay, and yes, again there is a cultural richness of the Philippines or the Filipinos, and they are interacting with neighboring countries. And this is what the arrows are pointing to here, no? The kind of interactions that we had with the neighboring areas. Again, here our most common or frequent visitors and trade partners were mainly Chinese seafarers, but also they included Austronesian, Indonesian, and Australian people. And we had in our culture and in our history documents that attest that we already had our own traditional boat building and marine architecture that was used during the time prior to the landing of Magellan on the Philippine grounds. So this is a picture of how traditional boat building was done. They came in different forms, and each form would mean a certain level in society. There are forms that would be for fishing, forms for war, and forms for honoring the leaders of their area. Now, after that prologue, let me just go and give you my background on how I came about this presentation today. As I said, I have a mound full of herpetological references, which I accumulated through years, ever since I started teaching herpetology. I actually have, Dr. Marian said it's 2,000. I have almost 2,000 because I have not yet inputted everything. The bibliography listed by Emerson C lists about 1,600, but many of them include news clips, newspaper materials. Most of my materials are published articles and books and other references. So after cleaning up the very, very large data set, I ended up with something like 1,600 materials to clean up and put together in this for analysis. So I tried to divide them into year or decadal divisions from 1521 to 1600s up to 2021. And in the graph, you would see that it was very difficult to find the actual herpetological data and material that was focusing on herpetology. I did find some, or my students with their help also helped me found materials that cited on certain documents, but they were very difficult to find. So you could see here from 1521 to the 1800s, a dearth of information materials. Expectantly, because we didn't have much Filipinos yet and other people who were doing scientific research in the Philippines then. And then there was a slow growth in the 1800s to the 1900s, where I recorded something like 62 references, and then started to grow from 81 to 244. And then in 2001 to 2021, there was, within this year, within these periods that we are in now, there is a zoom of 1,002. But this does not contain everything. This is only what we were able to gather so far from what I have accumulated over the years. Maybe there are more. I believe there are more. And just yesterday, I already heard another new publication coming up. So I did not have that in this list. Okay, so there is a fast growth of publications on herpetological studies, meaning there is a dynamic move in herpetological research in this country. So let's go to the Spanish colonial period. My question is, was there herpetological or herpetofaunal consciousness in the history of the Philippines from March 17, 1521 to 1898? Well, going back, as I said, he landed in Cebu in 1521, but after that, this is wrong spelling, sorry, after which he died in his encounter with Lapu-Lapu in Mactan. Maybe he could have been a friend if he did not die, no? But eventually Miguel Lopez de Legazpi came in and established the first permanent settlement in Cebu. And we know our Philippine history, so I would not go much into that detail. This is a picture of the fleet of Magellan when he came to the Philippines. I just got it from, I clipped it from the internet. So this is what I have in terms of materials from 1521 to 1800. A list of Plasencia, Juan de Plasencia on the customs of the Tagalogs, barely mentioning things, but somehow having words like ahas or other rare mentions of herpetology, ahas, or palaka. No? And then we have Antonio de Morga, and then later Francisco Mastrilli. He was a priest, and then the Diego Bobadilla on the Philippine Islands, which was edited by Emma Helen Blair. And then so on. No? We have Diego Duarte, John Francis Carreri, Antonio Mozo, and then somebody described simply as an Englishman. And then we have Bowen Emmanuel, Dumeril Gray, and Laurenti. Let me go through this highlight of these materials. The Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas was written by Antonio de Morga, and it was later on published or brought out by Eliot in 2008. But this was written in what was this? 1609. No, it might have been used. So they say not only in the Philippines but in other parts of Southeast Asia where the Filipinos interacted or who were seafarers moved to interact with one another for economic reasons. Morgan described the appearance of the Asian scene of Dutch arrivals to Spanish imperial ambitions. And it dealt with the history of Spaniards in the colony and gave a final chart to the study of Filipino customs, manners, and religions in the early years of Spanish conquest. So where is herpetology there? Well, the herpetology there was emphasized by later on when Edward Taylor came to do his studies. It was one of his references. He used them, he cited certain comments such as this: the forests and settlements have many serpents of various colors which are generally larger than those in Castilla. Some have been seen in the forests of unusual size and wonderful to behold. The most harmful are certain slender snakes of less than 1 vara in length, which dart down upon passerby from the trees, where they generally hang, and sting them. Their venom is so powerful that within 24 hours, the person dies of raving. The largest snakes being referred to was the Malayo python reticulatus. So the mention of herpetology or herps was actually embedded and not very popular, no, very few. In fact, even Jose Rizal was said to have referred to this reference by Antonio de Morga in his studies. Mind you, that was Taylor was using that material that was already in 2022. Okay, 1922, I mean. Okay. And then John Francis Gemelli Carreri came up with a voyage around the world in a collection of voyages. And this again was cited by Taylor in his book, The Snakes of the Philippine Islands. No, this is the book of the Philippine Islands, And this is, oh, sorry. This is the one that has been used as a reference for looking into Philippine studies or Philippine perspectives. And letter from the Father Marcelo Francisco Mastrilli to Father Juan Salazar also mentioned or gave ideas of their consciousness of herps, no? As he said here, which I quote, "What we saw when we came to take out this throne certainly surprised us. For before we reached the fire, two most venomous serpents came out of the feet of the chair, terrifying the soldiers greatly. And truly, nothing other than serpents and poison ought to guard the chair of the great devil of Mindanao." So again, these were citations from this old, Taylor citations brings us to the consciousness of herpetofauna that was present or minimally present in these old books regarding the Philippines. Now in 1734, we have the Carta Hydrográfica y Chorográfica de las Islas Filipinas, which was made by the Jesuit cartographer Pedro Murillo Velarde with Nicolas Bagayan and Francisco Suarez. This is known as the mother of all maps of the Philippines. No, this map actually emphasizes, we use this in our campaign for the West Philippine Seas actually, because it emphasizes the term used by Velarde on the panakot. And panakot is a Tagalog word for threat or in danger, in effect, describing the rocks as a threat or danger to ships. When the British tea clipper ship Scarborough struck the rocks of Panakot on 12 September 1748, European cartographers named the shoal the Scarborough Shoal. No, the map also gives, for the first time, a name to that islet, which is Los Bajos de Paragua, to the previously unnamed Spratlys. Los Bajos de Paragua means the shoals of Paragua. This map names two Filipinos, Francisco Juarez, who drew the map, and Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay, who engraved it. This map is considered the mother of all Philippine maps. So that's the significance of the Scarborough Shoal. Nabangga kasi hindi nila alam, and then they call it Panakot, no? Panakot. But we could then be proud that the Philippines has been properly mapped out, no? Kamukha naman talaga niya, yan ang Pilipinas. And also, I would like to emphasize here that besides the map, there were also illustrations of the Philippine setting that time. And here you would see, ito na siya. You would see that I was emphasizing on the consciousness and the presence of the crocodile already, plus the presence of the snake there. Nakalimutan ko, I forgot to put a circle out there, but this is the Python reticulatus or the Malayo Python reticulatus. And also, Antonio Mozo in 1763 came up with his Noticia Historico-Natural, translated by Blair and Robertson, which included medical document or medical information, and introduced the use of gall snakes for medicine. No? And then also Laurenti's books have this, the specimen medicum exhibens synopsin retilium enendatum cum experimentis circa venena and antidota reptilium austracorum cod Aurohiliriate and Consensu and Vienna, Japan. And I could not help but put focus on the illustrations that are placed here, which is listing of specimens and their descriptions, as well as their illustrations. Okay, that was in 1768. And then our very own Jose Rizal, although not a herpetologist and not necessarily a hardcore zoologist, because he was more into medicine, actually did his own collections. He could not collect. I mean, he exchanged specimens and sent specimens to his mentors and associates in Spain and Europe, but he could not collect specimens using a gun because he was a refugee detainee in the Pitan. But we know that he did have his collections, and these are some clips of his communications with Dr. Adolf Meyer. I have just received your letter dated 24 March, and I agree heartily to your petition that I prepare for you scientific specimens. So he was already learning specimen preparations. Maybe he could have been a good curator. Only that as I am a deportee here, I'm not free to go anywhere or use a rifle. In spite of this, I shall do everything possible to serve you. All the birds, reptiles, etc. that I can buy, I shall keep for you. I also know a little about their preservation. However, I should like to know if Dr. Schandenberg will accept any kind of animals, reptiles, and skulls, for you may have already have the kind that are here. I would prefer that you send me a catalog with prices so that I may not pay too much for them. So here, the letter down is by mail, by the mail boat of last month. I sent you a box of preserved animals through Dr. Schandenberg at Manila in accordance with your suggestion. The animals I sent you were the following: 3 snakes, talig bilao, dupog, 1 sagitta volans, 1 seahorse, 2 scorpions, 2 ascarides, various coleoptera, 1 boa constrictor, 1 iho, 1 iwo, 1 ataybia, 1 kalasagan, 1 tipuso, 1 inagudlog, and 1 kabang-kaban. Many of them I don't understand anymore. Kalasagan, I don't know that. Tipuso, I do not even know that. Maybe we do need to make a research. But his contributions, and of course he is our hero. So several specimens or species were named after him, especially the Draco rizali. No? So the flying lizard. And then another one important thing is his education or his studies. He was part of the ilustrados, or the educated and well-traveled people. So he had exposures to foreign zoos and museums, and natural science was his pre-med course. And he was students of, together with Antonio Luna, were students of Father Casto de Elera of the University of Santo Tomas. And he graduated from Ateneo Municipal de Manila in 1872 to 1877, studied philosophy, chemistry, and natural history. And also he joined Municipal de Ateneo Intramuros, had a natural history room with bird specimens, but they were destroyed by fire. Rizal was a naturalist in the Pitan, Zamboanga Peninsula, and he collected special specimens for Adolf Meyer. And these are some of the specimens, and this is an illustration of his house in the Pitan. And these are, maybe this one was referring to the museum that was burned by fire. Okay, this one. And you would see that these are the precious specimens there, properly preserved in beautiful cabinets. No? Now, the Pastor Castro de Elera was their teacher. And I would, just like JC's presentation last time, legacy of the Pastor Castro de Elera is a very, very important legacy for us. He left with us the catalog of Museo de Historia Natural, and he established for us the first and most extensive museum of natural history in the country, which was established at the University of Santo Tomas. This is a picture of those books where he had his scientific accounts of the fauna of the Philippines. Although most of his collections were invertebrates, he did have good collections of large ones, just like the picture that I have presented earlier. Okay, he was both a priest and a dedicated scientist. No, his collections were estimated to be more than 10,000 specimens of mix of minerals, botanical collections, and zoological collections as well. And of course, this beautiful perspective of what I think is the current view of the museum in Santo Tomas, although this was a picture of what it used to be in the past. And I have to emphasize there are the turtles there and the snakes there up there and the lizards also there. That's why I chose this picture. And yes, continuously you have the Fauna de Filipinas by Father Casto de Elera. And of course, illustrations of herps. So I clipped this after the Misa de Aportad, or opening mass of the Holy Spirit of the academic year in 1884-1885. Father de Elera delivered the traditional Discurso de Apertura, or opening discourse on the Catalogo Sistematico de toda Fauna de Filipinas, or systematic catalog of all fauna of the Philippines. An excerpt from his 3-volume monumental work, in which he was awarded with a Diploma of Merit at the Philippine Regional Exhibition in Manila in 1895. In addition, he wrote an earlier book on Contribución de la Fauna de Filipinas, a la Fauna de Filipinas, or Contribution to the Fauna of the Philippines in 1915, and a 500-page manuscript of sermons. So we give our great respects and gratitude for this missionary to the Philippines, not being only one who answered for the spiritual needs of the people, but also establishing intellectual, scientific based foundation for the Philippine fauna. And the second part is the Philippine-American War and the Philippines' emerging autonomy. Prior to, actually, there was a war between the Spain and the United States, even prior to the coming of the Japanese, no? And if you would recall history, no, our country were doing guerrilla warfare with them, and that's how our independence movement started off. But during this time, there was already a beginning of European studies coming to the Philippines and a documentation of herpetofauna, no? And so I listed here the names of the people who came and highlighted those who have their greatest contributions. Boettger, Boulenger, of course, Casto de Elera had 3 books, but I considered it as one count, no? And then we have Gunther, and then we have Peters. The rest are either short or single or one material, but they became part of the information were brought to Europe, because these were scientific studies that enhance the European education, especially in science. And the Philippines was a very rich source of scientific material. Okay, so I just placed here some of those titles of their contributions of those who highlighted that period of those periods of years between the Philippine-American War and going toward the Japanese War later on. Most of them were European and generally Austrian and German, no? So you have their Boettger, for example, is Katalog der Reptiliensammlung im Museum der Sennenkerbischen Naturforseden, Giselle-Kark in Frankfurt. So we have them, but I have the full citations of this listing in my very, very long Excel collection. And then we also had the start of the establishment of the Bureau of Science Manila in 1901. This was designed by American architect Edgar Bourne and was located in the campus of the University of the Philippines in Manila. Okay, so there was a kind of the start of booming and coming up of collections for scientific data studies, and they were all placed in the Bureau of Science Manila. Now that was the center of all collections and scientific research then. And one of those who dominated that time was Edward Harrison Taylor, whose extensive studies in herpetofauna or Philippine herpetofauna remains today with us as baseline or basis for current studies in analyzing distributions as well as assemblages and ecological implications of the presence and absence of this species, primarily because herpetofauna are among the best indicators of ecological environment, the status of ecological environment. And by the way, Taylor was able to describe and name the Limnonectes woodworthy from a collection in Mulawin Creek. Although it is said that he did not really go out to field, he just paid people to collect specimens for him, and he processed them in his field laboratory. He came up with a big bulk of materials that are precious base formation or base data for all herpetological studies. He lived up to 1978. No, I was already 1978. I was a college student by then. So he had a lot of publications that came to my consciousness even while I was already teaching. So Edward Taylor was the first herpetologist to explore the rugged highlands of Cordillera, Central Mountain Range in North Central Luzon Island, Philippines. His relatively brief collecting sorties took him to several areas of this vast mountain range. Taylor described 9 new species of frogs, lizards, and a snake from various mountain localities in the Cordilleras, all of which appeared at that time to be unique to this region. Few field collections of herpetofauna from the Cordilleras took place after Taylor's work, save for a brief visit by members of the Philippine Zoological Expedition of the Chicago Natural History Museum, which is the predecessor of Field Museum of Natural History, right after the Second World War. More recently, herpetologists from the United States National Museum of Natural History surveyed the herpetofauna in several localities around Cordilleras in the late 1980s. Most of the results of this effort, however, still remain unpublished. But yes, since if they are properly preserved, they could still be studied and will generate information and understanding soon or later. So after that, we have the short Japanese occupation of the Philippines between 1942 and 1945. I could only highlight the destruction of the Bureau of Science Manila. This is the note from Merrill, Elmer D. Merrill, and yes, sadly he reports it and said the herbarium contained many thousands of types and a very impressive series of isotypes from older historical collections from India, China, Malaysia, tropical Africa, and Australia. In the zoological field, there were very extensive collections of insects, reptiles, birds, fishes, and mammals. Some of these collections were also rich in types. The library, one of the largest and most carefully selected accumulations of scientific books in Asia and Malaysia, was a remarkable assemblage of basic literature. These great collections of literature and natural history specimens of the Bureau of Science represent the result of consistent efforts of a large number of individuals over a period of more than 4 decades. This loss is an irreplaceable one. And I would read that part which caught my attention. My informant states that, in short, the Japanese obliterated everything of scientific value, the loss of the important libraries being particularly serious. It goes well without saying that involved in this destruction was all the reserve stock of the Philippine Journal of Science and other publications of the Bureau of Science. While basic references works may be replaced by photostat or microfilm reproduction, it will be quite impossible to secure copies of many badly needed reference works because of their great scarcity. So that was sad. We could have feasted on a lot more data information, but we did manage to get back some because of the foreign authors themselves, or the foreign scientists themselves. We were able to generate some of this data, just like the works of Edward Taylor. I now have a lot of collections. When I started establishing the wildlife library, then I was able to ask for many of this, and many of these valuable information or old publications are now housed, of course, in the museum library. They are there. And in 1901 to 1950, we know that there is now an increasing trend for more research. Education was open. The Philippines was an open area for foreigners to come in and study. And our universities were actually dominated by foreign administrators, mostly Americans. So I just tried to highlight some, I highlighted the dominant figures then from 1901 to 1950. Take note that Dr. Rabor was already starting off his works by that time. Although Taylor was in the forefront and doing a lot of things on his herpetological research, Valladolid was also a Filipino who started off to bloom and take lead in studies in natural history. Although his works were not predominantly herpetology, he had good contributions to Philippine natural history study. So maybe some of you are familiar with Boulenger also, Griffin, Hare, Smith, and of course, he just passed away, I think last year or this year, Bob Inger, who came up with monograph on Philippine amphibians without coming to the Philippines. The specimens were sent to him by the American soldiers who came to the Philippines. They were sent to the museum and he processed them and studied them. He collected data on them. And he has generated a valuable book reference on morphological characterizations of the then existing amphibians in the Philippines. I had the honor to meet him in the Field Museum of Natural History when I went there for training. And then next would be the progressive growth of the 20th century on the leadership of people. Dr. Rabor, Dr. Alcala, and Dr. Alcala's mentor, W.C. Brown. That was 1951 to 2000. there were 444 publications that I was able to put together. These are just highlighted. There are single publications by single people or group or people or institutions. I couldn't put them all here. Ang dami niya, no? 44 publications. But we have the tandem of Alcala, the partnership of Alcala and other people coming up to 33. And then Offenberg 10. The Brown and Alcala partnership is really amazing, you know, and highly productive. Dr. Alcala did the collections, and he did his master's under the tutelage of Walter C. Brown. And then we have Golki, who was working independently, mostly in the Visayas region, Panay, and she is a very prolific writer, very talented person. Okay. And she writes not only on herpetology, but she can write popular pieces or popular papers. I placed Hampson here as the leader of those youth or young newly graduates from Oxford who came to the Philippines and studied the fauna of Polillo Islands. And then Bob Inger, aside from his book, also generated other articles. Lazelle is the one who gave time or gave attention to the flying lizards. And then Leviton also had a big bulk of studies coming out during this period, 1951 to 2000. Of course, Dr. Rabor is here, although he is not a herpetologist fully. No, he was more of mammalogist, ornithologist. He had a big mound of collections, and many of them of course, a greater bulk of them are at the Silliman University Museum, but he donated much of his collections also to the University of the Philippines. Then he gave them to the College of Forestry. Eventually, those collections were transferred to the Museum of Natural History. And then we have Ross, and then still there are remnants of Taylor's work here. And so, as I said, Dr. Rabor is, of course, he is regarded as the father of Philippine wildlife conservation and a prominent zoologist conservationist. He is more of an ornithologist, but as I said, his collections of herpetofauna were very, very important to establish good studies of herpetology in the Philippines. We use them for our herpetological classes when I started to teach herpetology in the University of the Philippines way back in 1995 yata. Okay, so according to Dr. JC's talk last time, he authored 87 scientific and popular books and articles, but most of them were on birds and mammals. Now, this is the father of Philippine herpetological studies, Dr. Angel Alcala. I can only highlight on his most popularly used contributions, no? And he is the one who has been fully trained on herpetology under the tutelage of Walter Brown. He did that for his master's, and this is the output of his masteral work. The Philippine lizards of the family Skinkidae and the Philippine lizards of the family Geckonidae. I met Dr. Alcala in the founding of the BCSP, or by the Wildlife Conservation Society of the Philippines. No? And we used to see each other every time there is a WCSP conference. When I started teaching the herpetological class, no, there was a time when he asked me, "Oh, Leti, how are you?" And I told him, "Sir, we are reviving the dead herpetology class in UPLB." And said, "Oh, that's good. Don't worry, I will help you." He was then the DENR secretary. And one of those unexpected days, he came to my class my laboratory class, without letter, without notice, without ado. His guards were Dr. Who's this? Dr. Malayang and forgot Dr. I forgot the name of that prominent scientist or psychologist. I forgot his name. But they sat there and they listened to Dr. Alcala giving a lecture and inspiring my students in the then basement laboratory hall in the FBS. It never left my mind. It was very inspiring. The DNR secretary coming to my class just to inspire my 7 students. And one of them became his protege to become a great herpetologist also. So father of Philippine herpetology. He graduated with BS Biology, magna cum laude at Silliman University, attended Stanford University to complete his master's, and then earned his PhD as well as an honorary doctorate both from the Xavier University and University of Southeastern Philippines. And he became a professor and president of the Silliman University. He also became DNR secretary and chair of the Commission on Higher Education, and advisor on United Nations projects, World Bank General Environment Facility, GEF, and the Marine Science Institute, University of California. He is one of the first Filipinos inducted into Fulbright Hall, and he is also regarded as a hero in Southeast Asian biodiversity conservation. Dr. Alcala's bright mind is still very active these days, very sharp, and I always count encounters with him as special moments of my life. And then the next generation, this guy was part of my class to whom Dr. Alcala came to lecture. And this guy became Dr. Alcala's protege, Dr. Arvin Jesmos. And this guy became his friend, Dr. Rafe Brown. And the Rafe Brown, Arvin Jesmos was like the W.C. Brown Alcala tandem. They were highly productive herpetological research collaborations. They came up with a lot of fieldworks and expeditions and generated a lot of information. Of course, there are also other university-based herpetological studies, and we now recognize technology-aided data treasuries. That is 2001 to 2021. This tandem dominated the herpetological studies in the Philippines. And the leadership of Dr. Arvin Jesmos and Dr. Rafe Brown has led into many expeditions that has led to new discoveries and descriptions. Here again, since I could not place them all, there are about 1,002, and I have not yet recorded everything, so I could only highlight some. Alcala's works are still new. These are Alcala et al. Or Alcala alone. All of these can have et al. No? And some of them can have other people with them. Like Gonzalez would include Lacaste and myself. Gojo Cruz would include myself and some others. But the lead authors, I have placed them there. And then you have Dr. Alcala et al. 8, Bennett, Daniel Bennett. The late Daniel Bennett focused on monitor lizards. He observed them there in the field. And then Rafe Brown, 13, Bukol, 7, Kausaren, part of her dissertation, part of which I also reviewed, 5, Jesmos et al. Also, 26, David 4, Gojo Cruz, a rising herpetologist in Central Luzon, to be a leader soon in herpetological studies at the Caraballos and further beyond, trained at UPLB, a very good writer also starting off. And then he's a lot of still to be described specimens from his thesis. And Golke, as I said, continues to be very productive, 32. JC Gonzalez and the rest of us, 5. Koch would have 5. Leviton dominated the previous, helped to dominate the previous cohort, but he still has his outputs together with Jess Moss, Rafe Brown, Seiler, Weinel, etc. Lincoln has 10, Oliveros 10, Shop in Palawan has 11, Schaefer's 4. Seiler, I think, is a student of Rafe Brown, and he works in the same lab in Kansas. And he is a very, very productive person, also collaborating with our local budding scientists. Also, he brings them to the field and they come study together, and then they generate data and publications. And then Vanderplog 1, Weinel 3, and Welton 10. Yeah, that's 10. These people are high energy people who will still generate new ones, especially those who still have collections. One, out of my observation, one field expedition on herpetology will always generate a species novum. There will always be a new discovery. That's how lacking how lacking we are still in terms of scientists and herpetologists who can cover every area of the Philippines for herpetological research. My advice, I'll talk to him about them later on, okay, in herpetology. So starting 2001 to 2021, my team, my class of 6 graduate students counted at least 1,002 new publications. And there have been new descriptions of newly discovered and described species. From the original of 95 in 2000, the Philippine count of amphibians is 116. The reptiles have progressed from more than 200. There are now 377 species and counting. I've tried to place them here visually so you can see, no, that there is a high level of endemicity among our herpetofauna. And that notes of how important the Philippines is in terms of herpetological study and analysis. And even our frogs continue to increase in number. Okay, 93 of our frogs are endemic. Okay. And yeah, just to place them in number, the count, yun pareho lang naman yun, tsaka to, these are the same. But just to show you the number of counts, 116 and 377, and how I ciphered them to one. And so I'd like to emphasize here that we have a lot of good books. This is the book by Inger. Now this was revived and reprinted with a introductory message from Rafe Brown, but the original descriptions are there. These are very important because the original descriptions stand to differentiate species. Although some nomenclature have changed because of the fast reanalyzing based on DNA, the descriptives and the reassignments into new species are very, very important based on their morphological characterizations. And of course, this is one of the comprehensive books of Maren Golke, The Herpetofauna of Panay Island, Philippines. This Philippine Red List booklet still waits to be published as a book. No, but this is just a quick answer to the need of our DNR for implementation of rules and guidelines of the 9147. So we have a picture presentation of the threatened species of the Philippines so that they can have a way to, a reference of when they try to enforce government rules and policies. And yes, we have a taxonomic revision of the flying lizards by McGuire and Alcala, and many more. No, the field of herpetofaunal research in the Philippines is colorful, attractive, enticing, interesting, and really open for more people who would have their heart for it. There is not much competition to do here. There is only one good committed work to do, because every area needs a person, a dedicated person, to do the research and come up with new discoveries and new analysis and new understanding. And of course, we have the assistance or help from the development of good technology. Now it is easier to look for listings. It is easier to find how many are endemics. It is now easy to find out if there is a new species that has been described. You can find pictures. And not only through this, but you can even write to the authors directly. You can ask them, okay, the new discovery or a discovery of the Pulcranag Gatmani was just with an email of Herpetogo with Dr. Rafe Brown. He said, Dr. Rafe Brown, is this the Gatmani you are referring to? And he said, he looked into it and said, yes, Dr. Rafe Brown, this is the first record here. It has not been recorded for more than 50 years. Okay, so they had it published, and wow, he is now very popular. And Gatmani has been on the news for several weeks that time. And then, of course, we have our local versions of consolidating data. This is organized and founded by Dr. Arvin Jesmos, and it encourages young Filipino scientists, herpetologists, to join, so that in here you can consult, you can contribute your data, you can have intellectual discussions and exchanges, and expand your horizons in herpetological research. And these are the most current or recent books. What I failed to place here is the Key to Venomous Snakes by Weigmann. But these are two books that are already part and parcel of my herpetology classes. This is the herpetological bibliography by Emerson C. that contains 1,600 plus citations, but many of them are clips, newspaper materials. No, he tried to gather all information from the 18th century up to 2014. So there are a lot of new ones, and those new ones are now in my list. Am I right? Is it 20? Yeah, it's 1800s to 2014. So the 2014 up to 2019 or 2021 are now incorporated in this lecture that I am sharing with you. So my epilogue: much is yet to be discovered and to be done. We need to know our rich herpetofauna so that we can properly protect and conserve them. Come on, ride on to the bandwagon. Areas that we can do, there are still a lot of unexplored habitats. We can continue to do photo documentation. We do digital recording of audio on calls. We should be able to establish our digital library soon if we can consolidate them. The Philippine Herp Watch has portions of that, and the GBIF also keeps that. No? And we can do geotagging and biological monitoring. We can establish or continue to strengthen our online databases, and we need more people. We need to educate our people. The love for herpetology and the love for biodiversity in itself should be in our hearts, but it has to be started off at the very ages of our young children, so that they do not become destroyers of the ecosystems and the environment. They should be able to value their own biodiversity and be proud of it, and change their lives and practice good ecological responsibility. We need teachers to influence them that way, to write children's books, herpetology, Philippine fauna, Philippine plants, put them to storybooks. We also need geneticists, genetic data forensics, digital museum, data morphometrics. Although we have the GBIF, we need more efforts to make a centralized database for the whole Philippines. One that is connected to each other through the museums of the Philippines, but one that is also organized and systematic so that it can protect as well as share good information. And then the photo for rare and cryptic species are those done by the people who go out to the field, who have the knees, the strength, the energy to do field work and make the collections and stay up there late night just waiting for specimens to get out of their holes. Video on behavior, feeding and breeding. As I said, bioacoustics is important. And then local names and documentation is also necessary. Remember that one by Jose Rizal that I don't understand many because we have forgotten the local names. Conservation-based expeditions, habitat identification and protection need data to evaluate. Ecological in situ and ex situ studies and Philippine red lists are important. No? We need people who will be dedicated to do serious, committed, and dedicated work. Not only on herpetology though, but yes, my call is herpetology. It is here where the challenge is high because you have to study out during that night and you have to brace yourself against your fear on snakes. You have to learn to befriend them and you have to learn to manage them well. But yet there is always that promise or hope that on every night of expedition or in any expedition that you go, you might discover something new. Describe something that has not been seen before. Generate a new scientific name in honor of the people you love and admire and have inspired you. And of course, use them to campaign that people should protect their habitats because a destruction of their habitats is a destruction of ecosystem that affects humanity, the people, the Filipinos. Our forests are waiting to be protected by us. And those life that are crawling there are the ones that would say, hey guys, protect us or you are also destroying yourselves. There are pictures of students, although Miss Sangila I have not met her personally. I have seen her works as inspired by the teachings of Arvin and Rafe. No, these people are people I've worked with. My advisees, all of them. Almost this is the advisee of Dr. JC, but she should have been, if I didn't go on leave, I could have worked with her. And then Norman Greenhawk is my partner or collaborator in our ex situ studies at the Hortorium on Project Palaka. I have several students in herpetology now. I try to push them, inspire them to do more serious herpetological work because it pays. Not necessarily always in money, but it pays in terms of fulfillment, in terms of service, in terms of nationalism, and in terms of global significance and importance. Yeah, recalling herpetological studies in the Philippines for me is touching, dramatic. I love my students when they become greater people who are able to contribute to the enrichment of the biodiversity and protection of the Philippine ecosystems. With that, I end my lecture. Thank you very much.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much, Dr. Afuang, for that wonderful and informative talk. Actually, I am awestruck with the immensity of the amount of literature and bibliography that you accumulated and researched for your talk. And quite honestly, ma'am, you set the bar really, really high for the succeeding talks dito sa Baliktanaw. Ninenervous tuloy ako. Ako next, ako po yung next speaker. Ma'am, again, congratulations to your wonderful talk, ma'am. So, ma'am, let us now have our open forum. Reminders lang to our audience here in Zoom, please use the Q&A feature to send in your questions. And to those who are watching via YouTube Live, leave your questions in the comment box, and our technical assistant will copy it to Zoom. So we'll try to answer, Ma'am Leti will try to answer as many questions as possible.
Do I remove my stop share now?
Sige, okay lang din po, ma'am, para madali kayong mag-refer. Kahit hindi na po muna, para madali kayong mag-refer din sa mga. Okay, ma'am. Let's start the first question. I think we can still entertain about 4 or 5 questions. Okay po, simula kay Mr. Eugene Lawrence Lugatok. Hi, Eugene. Good morning po, ma'am. I'm Eugene from UPLB. I've been browsing and trying to read the Sino-Spanish Codex, the Boxer Codex, dated circa 1590. I'm wondering if you or your team have looked into the creatures, both mythical and real, presented in this book. Some of the animals may have real and extant counterparts.
Oh, sorry, Eugene, to disappoint you here. No, I have not gone to the Sino-Spanish Codex. Maybe you can send me a link and copy so that I can look at them later. Yeah, and then we can communicate.
Okay. Second question. There's from an anonymous attendee, bale nilagay lang po sa chat. What is the effect of the colonization of the US in the Philippines in herpetofauna studies? Did the colonization lead to more publications in the field or the other way around po?
Colonization of the US to the Philippines?
Yes,
I would say that it has opened the Philippines to become a study ground or area of studies. No, we would see that even in the history of the University of the Philippines, we were dominated by American administrators then, and a lot of scientists. The walls of UP Diliman, I've seen a lot of pictures of Campbell and many others. No, even Merrill was there. It has actually opened up, and it has influenced the local people, the Filipino scholars, no, to be more bold, to be confident in doing research. In fact, collaborations would have been much better if could have been much more productive if they were practiced well during that time. As it is now, there is a great effort towards collaborating, and so we are more productive, no? The effort of one put together becomes much more beautiful. Parang yung walis ting-ting, no? If you are together, you become stronger. If you work as one, you may work well, but the impact may not be as strong as when you are with others.
Right. Okay. Okay. We have from the chat, may question. Bali tatlo po yan. Siguro bago ko po sabihin yung tatlong questions, pwede po akong mag-question din po, mag-inject. Okay.
Yung mga sagot ko, Philip.
Naman, ma'am. Right. I'm very interested dun sa mga sinabi niyo po ng mga herpetologists throughout the years, 500 years of expedition. Ma'am, sa tingin niyo po, who made the most significant contribution in Philippine herpetology information? In terms ng mga number of specimens collected or number of species described?
Well, hindi ako nag-build. I mean, I used to have that count, no? Naka-column yan,
yes,
naka-Excel Taylor, Inger.
Yes,
I was trying to look for that data. I have that, but I stopped counting. But I cannot necessarily compare them because one serves as a foundation for another. Like Taylor, you cannot I mean I will never take Taylor as one, even if the counts may be less, because he has laid a great foundation of it. Inger, his detailed studies on the morphology, it should be something that every herpetologist should be able to practice and learn. And then of course Dr. Alcala, no? His monograph, when I went to Silliman, I saw those dusted books there, nandun sa taas. Sir, pwede ba bilhin ko na lang yan, sir? Kasi ginagamit ko sa herpetology class ko. I bought 6 sets of that. Now you can't find them anymore. Now they are sold at Amazon as rare books. And I think it's being sold as $49. Wala ka nang ganun. I want that book to be reprinted and republished. Sabi ko nga, pangarap ko, magawa ko lang ito. Gagawin ko yung ginawa ni Rafe, gagawin ko ng introductory statement, sabihin ko kay Dr. Arca, sir, i-reprint natin to. We need this for kahit kulang yan, kahit marami ng bagong specimens na na-discover sila, Rafe and Arvin. This is still a foundational material and we need to reprint it. Nawala kasi yung iba, napahiram ko sa estudyante, yung I just have two precious one pair na lang ang natitira, and I won't ever let go of that book at all over my dead cat. But yes, the works of Arvin and Rafe now are also very, very, very significant, no? But what I'm trying to say is, let us continue to work. I have emphasized who have contributed much. Golki's work, Marin's work is of high, I give her very, very high respect for what she has done and contributed. They are all important, but what I deem much more important is we can inspire more Filipinos to do the work for the Philippines. We're not against collaborative works. The lab of Rafe trains Filipinos now. Camille and Diane are there learning herpetology, looking at the specimens, analyzing the specimens. But my dream, we'll have our own herpetological laboratory in the University of the Philippines and train our own students to further. We will have a centralized herpetological study in the Philippines. Sinisimulan natin sa Project Palaka, but we would hopefully, in my lifetime, magawa natin. That will have a strong push together with Arvin. Of course, he is our stronghold at the National Museum, but we need a stronghold at the university. We are not limited here at the University of the Philippines. Ruby Causaren is active at De La Salle in Cavite. Paul Henrik Cojo Cruz is active in Central Luzon State University. Marites Anguila is in the Don Unrios. I forgot.
Father Saturnino Urios.
Yes, Father Saturnina Urios in Agusan. I'll have new students in Sarangani, and Pierre is active in Mindanao in the Sarangani region, and then the Bicol region will be dominated soon by my current students in herpetology. I dream for them, like Marvin Sarmiento is a good herpetologist also. So I see a very, very bright and exciting future for Philippine herpetological research. We just need to put them together into one effort so it becomes a Filipino endeavor and Filipino achievement.
Yes, ma'am. Very well said, ma'am. Very, very well said, and very, very inspiring. Meron pong question dito from Willem Joshua Tan. Actually, tatlo, pero baka ano ko na lang yung isa. Throughout the history of herpetology studies, has the conservation of herps gotten better or not?
This guy who is asking the question is a BS Agriculture, but he is a very good herpetology student in my class. So he's going to take his master's in herpetology. And he's asking that question. Of course, he knows the answer. Yes, we have the consciousness and awareness of the people has actually gone to a level that we can speak about conservation more confidently without necessarily threatening the people. Ano pinagsasasabi mo? No, the people has come to an understanding. We have NGOs who are really campaigning, but we still need a lot of work to do in terms of educating. We need to educate our own local communities and local people. without them to get to fully understand what we mean by conservation and what we mean by conserving our biodiversity. We can just be a bunch full of scientific work with no impact on the ecosystem, and we will continue to destroy our areas. Our government need to be educated, DPWH, all those buildings and all those who open up roads and, destroy patches of forest, they need to understand. They need to know that it is when they destroy the ecosystem to build something that they are destroying the future of the Philippines and its people.
Very insightful message, ma'am. Mang shoutout lang po from Rosemary Tapik. Shoutout to my Ninang Leti, Rosemary Tapik. And then from Dit Reyes, my commendations to Dr. Afuang for giving such a comprehensive account of Philippine herpetofauna. I couldn't agree more, ma'am. Congratulations daw po ulit. Meron pa tayo, pwede pa po tayo magtanong.
Ilang.
Apo.
Huwag yung pang Miss Universe, ha?
Okay, ma'am. From an anonymous attendee, how can we encourage more Filipinos, most especially the younger generations, to involve themselves in the study of Philippine biodiversity with emphasis on the herps of the country?
Pag wala ng COVID, come on, let's engage them. Let's go out to the field. The field experience is a transforming experience. Normally, that is the best experience for me for every semester when I bring my students out to the field. When they listen to frogs, for the first time, they capture a platymantis. And for the first time, when we capture an venomous snake, they are able to rub the back of the snake and get away their fear out of it. And they are able to see a frog, a turtle swimming in the clear waters of the river. That will change their life. But at the very beginning, let us teach them while they are young. If you can volunteer, let's work together. Gawa tayo ng libro sa mga bata, gawa tayo ng summer workshops, gawa tayo ng drama, ng sayaw, ng tula, so that it becomes acceptable, it becomes beautiful, it becomes a work of art, not embedded with hardcore science, pero it doesn't come as a hard difficult thing. Pag sinabi mo kasing science, parang people who would shun away from it. But put on an artistic touch out of it and put on a practical application on a daily life of people out of it. Huwag kang magkalat ng basura. Anong ibig sabihin? May science yan. Mag-classify ka ng basura. May science yan. Pupunta yan sa dagat. May science yan. But make it beautiful. Kasi pag sinabi mo nagkalat ka, alam mo, pag yung kinalat mo yan, pag tinapon mo, may mamamatay na palaka dyan sa ilog, mauubos ang turtle. Ano nga ba turtle? Ang
Pagong.
ang pagong, ganyan. Inspiration is very, very important. And inspiration education can be much more effective if it comes in an inspirational form, that they would not even feel that you are educating them the hardcore science thing.
I heartily agree, ma'am. Actually, I was one of the students who you inspired to go into wildlife biology, ma'am. Again, thank you very much for the inspiration, ma'am, throughout the years. Another question po, how significant is the collections of Father Casto de Elera of UST in Philippine herpetology? Kasi ma'am, meron tayong Bureau of Science Manila, which was destroyed in the war. Partially din ang Philippine Museum ata was destroyed. So the Castolero collections was our window from really the Spanish colonial period, yung mga collections po doon. So how important was the Elera collection, which is existing here now in UST?
I would not be able to give a good answer to that because I myself have not seen those collections. I have only read about them. But if there would be one who would know that, si Arvin, because his wife works at UST. She is a professor at UST, and they have gone to the museum. What I have seen are the collections of Silliman University, and they are great. The collections of Dr. Rabor are there, most of them. No, but the collections of, I'm sorry, I've seen the National Museum collections, but not the UST collections. Sorry.
No problem. I think we still have time for 2 or 3 questions. Unahin po natin kay Sir JC Gonzalez. Hi, Sir JC.
JC! Ba't ko magtatanong?
Yeah. Sabi po niya, ang tanong po niya is, any comments po regarding Father Camel's 1702 list of herpetofauna and Jose Lozano's illustrations of herpetofauna in 1847?
Yeah, I saw that, but yes, the collections of Jose Lozano, they are really, really good. Actually, JC sent me some copies of that, and I was able to manage to put one, but sorry, I didn't have much time to put more emphasis on these things. But yes, these are important materials and informations. Father Camel's list of herpetofauna should be, if possible, if it can be revived or it can be republished or come out, it would be very, very important. Jose Lozano is a very great artist, of course, and he made a great impact on Philippine fauna, no? So, but his herpetofaunal works. John Calvin Clareto would like to answer this question. Oy! Pwede daw? Sige, sino magsasagot?
Kayo po, na-answer nyo na po yan kanina ng live. Okay po. May question po si Dr. Noel Sabino. I think he raised his hand, pero pabalik. Nag-raise na hand.
Si Sir
Noel.
Noel.
He raised it again and then it disappeared again. Sige po. Tingnan natin po kung meron pong questions. Ito po kay Dr. Vivian Camacho. Hey, Ma'am Vives. Congratulations, Ma'am Leti, for a very informative and insightful presentation. My question is, what is the greatest challenge in herpetofaunal research in the Philippines? Bale po yung question ni Ma'am Vives would actually encompass other questions as well from other viewers relating to conservation.
Yeah, again is parang the greatest challenge is I don't like to be toward funds, money, no, but sa totoo lang, we just need our government to understand that scientific endeavor and research is primary in every country to move forward and understand its richness. So sa akin is, if the DOST is exerting efforts toward that, supporting researches, no, but there are a lot of I mean, they have funded a lot of studies already, no, and what we actually need is to be able to come up with their priority areas for studies. Pero sana there can be more freedom. Like for example, if you are a biodiversity person, mas mabibigyan ka ng freedom to choose the fields, and at the same time, you will be given the same support, not just to be parang nakabox ka sa certain priorities ng DOST. Ganon. Kasi iba yung perspective nila sa perspective din natin as scientists. No? Yun lang. But in terms of getting people inspired, getting people to work, I don't think it is a problem as long as they have the capacity or the means to do it, to study, may scholarships, merong and nandyan ang guidance ng professors. It's not going, I don't see it as a problem. Yun lang, yung sa funding support, pati yung I hate red tape, yung ang daming pabalik-balik sa documents, ayoko yun. It really hampers me a lot. Ganun. Sorry.
Maraming salamat, Ma'am Leti. Unfortunately, wala na rin po tayong time for further questions. So that was a great discussion with Ma'am Leti. Congratulations again. So everyone, let us congratulate our speaker for a splendid presentation. So to show our gratitude for your talk, Ma'am, let me present you both with this electronic certificate of recognition awarded to Dr. Leticia E. Afuang for serving as resource person during the 2021 MNH Baliktanaw, Kasaysayan at Kalikasan Webinar series, Herpetofaunal Studies in the Philippines, a recall. So held on 16th of June 2021, 10 to 11:30 a.m. Okay po. That signed by Dr. Marian E. De Leon. Okay po, let us all give Dr. Leticia Afuang a virtual round of applause.
Thank you. Thank
Okay,
you. Thank you so much.
Okay po, let me now turn you over to our MC for the closing part.
Thank you, Professor Philip. Before I end the webinar, let me give out a few reminders. Please evaluate the seminar to get a certificate of participation. The link is flashed on the screen and copied in the chat box of Zoom and the comments area of our YouTube live post. Please click on the link below so you will be able to evaluate it after the webinar. We will only accept responses until 3 p.m. We thank the following organizations and people for all the support, resources, and inspiration. Finally, please follow UPLB Museum on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Let us now all take a break. We hope to see you in our next seminar to be delivered by our current moderator, Professor Philip A. Alviola, and Professor Judelin C. Dimalibo on June 30, 2021. Keep safe, thank you, and goodbye. Please make sure you log out of Zoom for security purposes. Thank you.